Hi, this is Kent. Just testing the audio for Mahesh.
All right, it is time. Let's get started. So this is the NetConf 108 virtual meeting. We will be, of course, conducting this meeting entirely virtually. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. You should be fairly familiar with the Notewell. And there are some best practices if you want to go through them. As I said, since this meeting is going to be conducted entirely over MeetEcho, you should have used this link to be here. A quick tutorial on MeetEcho if you have not used it before. Watch the chat window for comments on the left side. It is next to the participant list where you might see your name. Next to the chat list is the hum tool that we will use for conducting our hums today. The virtual blue sheet will be done by MeetEcho itself. We'll record your presence, so you don't need to sign up anywhere. Queue will be also managed by, of course, by MeetEcho. To queue up to speak, use the microphone icon again under your name with the hand symbol. And it's your turn to speak, use the microphone icon with the play symbol. For Jabber, we'll talk on the next slide. Instead of Etherpad, we are using CodeMD. I would suggest that that on your browser, you open a separate tab. You can do it on the MeetEcho window also, but then you won't be able to see the meeting participation. Would suggest that, Kent, if you want to go ahead and maybe cut and paste that into the chat window for everyone. Thanks. You can go and set up Jabber if you haven't done before, and this particular link and give you the URI. Note that everything that is posted in Jabber will be cross-posted to MeetEcho's chat window. And the logs for Jabber will be available after the meeting. So the workgroup items and their status. Yang push notification capabilities is past the second working group last call. At this point, I believe it's pending an author update. The crypto types, trust anchor, and key store drafts are already in working group last call. The client server suite of drafts, which Kent will be talking about, are almost ready for working group last call. So following this meeting, we'll probably be sending all of them, hopefully, for working group last call. The HTTPS notification draft is still work in progress. And the Yang push notification messages has expired, but it's mainly because it's deferred till HTTPS notification work gets completed. So here's the agenda. Kent will go first with his suite of drafts, and that will be followed by me. For the non-chartered items, we have Pierre and Thomas presenting a suite Unite set of drafts. And then we have Chin Wu and Lui Peng presenting a set of drafts on data node capability and data export capability, followed by adaptive subscription and bulk subscription. And we will conclude with Kent presenting a new draft. All right, any questions?
Mahesh, I don't have a question, but I'm wondering if we should try the hum just to get a baseline of it.
Sure, I think that's a good idea. All right, so since the virtual hum is a new tool, let's go ahead and do a test. So let everyone know how to use the tool. So this is only a test. Watch for the bar graph icon on the left. It'll turn red if a hum is initiated. So at this point, we want to conduct a hum. It's just a test of the hum. And I want everyone to hum the loudest. Right. So if everyone in the room, could you please hum now the loudest? All right, you should have seen the result of the hum. I guess we still had a few people maybe who didn't vote. All right, so with that, Kent, anything else before we get started?
So the reason why maybe it's Forte and not the loudest is because there's 40 participants, but some of those participants are Meetecho or Jabber users, and the chairs themselves, none of those participants are able to hum, and yet the tally takes into account their presence. So Forte may have actually been everyone humming the loudest, except for those that couldn't. Okay, I see my slides up. Let me present video. Great. All right, so I guess we'll just get started with this. Here's, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Here's the status and issues for the current update for the client server suite of drafts. Next slide, please. There's been a number of updates since last meeting, but most notably, cryptotypes, trust anchors, and key store have all gone into working group last call. And I think everyone knows the status of those at the moment. Next slide, please. And the remaining set of drafts have had some significant updates made to them. And there's still a few items that we'll be discussing in this presentation to get them finished off. Next slide, please.
Sorry. Oops. Hold on.
Okay, great. So I just really have three items I want to discuss during this presentation. The first is what to do about clear text password fields. So a raw password is required to be configured whenever the model configures a client that itself needs to authenticate to a remote system. So for instance, if you're configuring an HTTP client that needs to connect to a remote system, the server, which is the HTTP client, would have to have the raw password value. It can't have crypt hash, for instance. So this is unlike when the server itself is authenticating a client, in which case it can crypt the crypt hash the password and then just compare the hashed values. So there is this need to configure raw passwords sometimes. In all these models, currently, those nodes are tagged with the NACM default deny all extension. And the question is, can or should we do better than that? So some thoughts are, first, we could modify the name of those values. So instead of just password, it could be clear text dash password, just prefix it with the word clear text. So this sort of provides a positive statement to the administrator that this value is clear text. Another idea would be to introduce the ability to encrypt the passwords. So this is sort of in line with how in crypto types and key store we're able to encrypt either symmetric keys or private keys. In a way, you can think of a password as like a symmetric key. But it's different. You wouldn't necessarily encrypt it exactly like a symmetric key. But the idea is there that we could, for instance, encrypt those passwords with a key that's been configured in the key store, in which case we would introduce a grouping. Well, okay, number 3 there is that maybe we could use the symmetric key grouping, but it, like I was just saying, it's not perfect. It comes with, for instance, that key format field, and also the content value would have to be binary, in which case it'd be base64 encoded, which may be not desirable for a configuration model. So the option 4 here is to define a new grouping in cryptotypes draft called password grouping, maybe. And you can kind of see an example of what that might look like on the right-hand side. So it's a choice of clear text password and encrypted password, where encrypted password would be a container containing the encrypted key value grouping. We'd have to work out the details. In green on the lower left side, you see, what would the format of this be? I mean, sure, we have the key. If it's an RSA key and you're encrypting with it, or an elliptical key and you're encrypting with it, what is the encrypted value format? If we don't have, if we don't use the key format field, then what would that format be? So I'll pause there for a second. Are there any comments? Again, this is a discussion, so any thoughts here? Please raise your hand so the chair can choose you for the audio cue.
Hi, so this is as an individual. I think this is a good issue to raise. I'm not sure whether the password to clear text password is that helpful. I've got no objections against it. I think the option 2, so the option 3 I'm not so keen on, where you end up with the key value being binary. I think that would be harder to use. I quite like the option 4 that you've got here of using a common grouping. It seems like this issue may turn up in other places, and solving it once generically feels like a good thing to try and do. So I'm not, I think that's quite a nice thing to do. The only question I have with that is whether people would sometimes always want the encrypted password and not allow the clear case password option, and whether if by having a grouping that makes that tricky. So that's the only question I'd have there. So that's just some thoughts.
So just responding to that last point, well, the model itself could introduce some features to disable the clear text password completely if on a global level. But of course, also the application level model could augment in or refine in a feature statement, an if feature statement to shut it off as well.
Yeah, yes, I've noticed that in another draft that you've I was reviewing, and I'm not sure that that's a great construct to do. The sort of an if feature statement is always false. I'm not sure I like that much. I can understand why you've done it, but it feels like a bit of a hack.
Okay, I did see that email, and I don't have a slide for it to discuss it, but you're referring to in Mahesh's draft, actually, HTTPS notif that he'll be presenting. In that, HTTPS notif, and we don't intend to support HTTP without the TLS transport layer. And yet it's using the HTTP stack, which supports both. So the idea is to just permanently disable that leaf or that branch that can't possibly ever exist. It's a little bit different in this case, though. Here I'm saying that the application data model could, I mean, and people do this all the time, even today. Already, people or refine in if feature statements to turn off parts of configuration that they don't want to be presented.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, so I'm going to take that as a positive that we'll try to define a password grouping. That would go in the crypto types draft, which, as Mahesh mentioned, is in working group last call. But so just keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next, how to specify HTTP client paths. Currently, the HTTP client grouping is solely focused on connectivity. Primarily, it's defining the client identity values. On the right-hand side, you can see a little snippet of config, and in the bottom most part of it, you see client identity basic auth credentials. So that's primarily, you kind of see the whole stack, though. The TCP parameters are, where to connect to, and the TLS parameters are what credentials to use to authenticate, and et cetera. But what URL path is intended to be connected to is the question. And on the left-hand side there, it says that it's assumed that the client knows how to construct the URL path. So, for instance, with NetConf and Yang-driven data models, the client can construct the paths necessary. It's obvious how to make the connection. But for instance, in the HTTPS notif draft, there's not really, what is that target resource that's supposed to be connected to? And so what that draft has done is augmented the HTTP client parameters value, or I should say container, with a leaf called path that enables the configuration of the path. So I guess the question is that good enough? I mean, that consuming data models would always augment in a path leaf if needed, or should we do something better here in the HTTP client draft? Any comments on that?
So Kent, I don't see anyone in the queue. Oh, hold
on. So again, as an individual, I think what you're doing here is the right choice. I think that augmenting in the path is better than always having it and having it not apply in some cases. So that's my preference, but I feel very strong on this.
Okay, then it'll stay as it is then, unless someone else, if there's an objection. It can always be raised during the working group last call, but right now I'll proceed as that. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have a few fix-me's. This is in the TLS client server draft, and specifically with the supporting of pre-shared keys or pairwise symmetric keys, a different way of parsing that acronym. And if you might recall, Hank, recommended we extend this TLS to support, both raw public keys and also pre-shared keys, and we did that. And then later on, he mentioned that pre-shared keys typically come with an ID, an identifier hint. So we added that, but there's some fix-me's here, which is what is the type? Is a string correct? Should it always be mandatory? And for that matter, what RFC should we be referring to for where these things are defined? So I think everyone saw that Hank replied to the mailing list, and he did actually provide an RFC where this is defined. Parsing that RFC, it looks like it's not mandatory. and also it looks like a type string is correct because, well, sometimes it can be a dotted quad, not binary network byte order, but just stringified IP address or domain names. So it looks like a string. Actually, maybe. Oh, it can also be a DN, a distinguished name, like LDAP distinguished name. So it can't be an INET host value. I was just about to say that maybe it could be an INET host, but it can't. So anyway, it looks like string is the right value. I don't actually think this is open for discussion anymore unless anyone has a comment. Okay, I don't think so. And that's next slide, please. So this completes the discussion items I wanted to bring to the working group this morning, or for me, it's this morning. Does anyone else in general? I mean, all these drafts are primed for working group last call. Are there any other comments? Something I didn't touch on, someone would like to raise before we finish this discussion? See, I see the chat windows. Yep. Okay, no comments in the chat window. All right, I guess that's good enough. Thank you. And Mahesh and I are going to switch presenters now, so just give me a second to bring up his slides. I'll start presenting.
Jürgen had a question.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Jürgen. Okay, yeah, there seems to be some issue with, can you make sure you press the audio, sending of audio button? Okay. Maybe at this point, just go ahead and type it out. Oh, he did type it out. Okay. He said he doesn't really have a question. Okay. So the next presentation is going to be on HTTPS-based notification. Next slide, please. All right. So the updates since 02, we actually had two updates, 03 and 04. We introduced a new model called IETF subnotif receivers list. Because of that and other changes, we also had to update the IETF HTTPS notif draft, module that we'll get into. And as a result, we also had to update the examples. And then finally, there was a question on the encoding of notifications in HTTPS notif. So we'll show an example of what that would look like. Next slide, please. All right, so as far as the IETF subnotif receiver list module, so there was some discussion about maybe subscribe notifications should really have a receiver instance list that then the transport specific models could augment. So this particular module introduces that. So it adds a list of receiver instances and with an empty choice for the transport type, which then, as you will see, whether it's the UDP draft that we'll talk about later and the HTTPS notif draft that can then augment and support a particular transport type. It also adds a leaf ref to one of the receiver instances within the module. So within the subscribed notifications receiver list. Next slide, please. As far as the HTTPS notif module is concerned, we decided to go ahead and first of all, it augments a case statement for the just introduced receive notif list module to add in the HTTPS notif transport type. And then the second big change is the fact that, as Ken suggested, he introduced HTTPS stack grouping within the IETF HTTPS client module. So this draft makes use of that grouping rather than having to define its own stack grouping. And as he already also discussed in his deck, we augment a path attribute for the URL of the receiver resource target, because there isn't one defined. And I think, Robert, you might have been referring to this particular statement here on trying to make sure the TCP support that we don't, well, since we don't support HTTP, this is the statement that is used to make sure that user can never configure HTTP transport. Next slide, please. So the example that we introduced in 03 version of the draft is of how you can use the HTTPS notif module without necessarily having to support everything within subscribed notifications. Since it's supposed to work with and without, or at least there is an ability for it to be used without using entirely everything under subscribed notifications. So previous versions of the draft had given an example of how to work with subscribed notification. This one introduces an example of a module and an instance example of without a subscribed notification. I think the main thing you'll notice is that between the two, one difference in the diagram is that the subscription started notification is not used when we are using the module without subscribe notifications. So that's the biggest change. Next slide, please. So on the question of encoding of notifications, okay, actually, let me pause. I believe there is a question.
Hi, this is Rashad. So I'm not sure I understand what you mean by without subscribe notifications, because you augment that module.
Right. So if you can go back to the previous slide. So this example module, which is in the appendix, uses the grouping from within HTTPS notif. So you'll notice the HTTPS notif has a grouping for the model, which, as you duly noted, gets augmented under subscribe notifications. So that's in the main body of the draft. In the appendix, we give an example if you don't want to use subscribe notifications or the whole or implement and subscribe notifications, how you could do it. You still use HTTPS notif, but not have to support everything under subscribe notifications. Does that answer your question?
I'll take a look.
Okay. I believe Eric was in the queue. Go ahead, Eric.
Can you turn on your microphone?
Okay. Oh,
there's also Tim Perry in the queue, so let's accept him. Tim, did you have a question or comment?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. So when we talked about this particular draft, I thought this draft was we were going to be able to use it in the context of the existing subscription mechanisms that you're talking about, subscribe notifications, as well as be compliant with, be able to be used within IETF push framework. Did I get that incorrect?
Right. So as I said, the main body of the draft talks about Yang push and subscribe notification. So that's in the body of the draft.
So when you say you're not using subscribe notifications, is this an example of how it would be used with push?
Kent, do you?
Tim, it's not actually an example of how you would use it with Yang push, because Yang push builds on top of subscribe notifications. This is an example where really it's it's not with all the bells and whistles of subscribe notifications. So you don't get, for instance, the subscription started notification that Mahesh mentioned. You also don't get replay and some of the other things that subscribe notifications comes with. But it's a very simple mechanism that if you just want to configure really almost hard code, it's not really hard code because it's configured, but it's you're just configuring a receiver, and then the protocol is just a stream, just a forever push, much like SSE currently in RESTconf, without any rate limiting or quality of service. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Would it be useful to add an example that it would work with push in it? Is it a useful informational text?
So there is an example in the draft that we use for how to use it with subscribe notification. You mean an instance example?
Yeah.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out. So in the draft, we say, hey, look, it can be worked. You can work it with subscribe notifications. The subscribe notifications directly. We can use it under the context of push, and you can use it with capabilities. You don't need all the capabilities with subscribe notifications, right? The fact that we already mentioned push in there, we ought to probably give an example of how it would be used within the push context. Was what I was thinking.
Right. So there is an instance example for how to use it with subscribe notifications, and then in the appendix we have an example of without, if you don't have subscribe notifications.
Right.
Hi, Mahesh. Just interjecting as a participant. Maybe
Sure.
we can modify our example so that instead of it being a simple or a base subscribe notifications example, it could actually be a push example. And we just simply say in text that push is a form of subscribe notifications.
Right.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we can certainly add that.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Eric?
Thank you. Oh, he's back. Eric? He's left again.
Yeah. Anyway, we're running out of time. So maybe, Eric, if you can go ahead and post your question in the chat window. So go to the next slide. Yeah, so there was a question on what the encoding of the notification itself would look like. So here's an example of what we believe it would look like. It's almost identical to RESTconf. The only change that we see would be in the prefix. So instead of using IETF RESTconf and the prefix that I've highlighted in red, it would say IETF HTTPS notif. I think there should be one final slide after this. Yeah, so barring maybe the example change that we just talked about, we believe that the document is ready for working group last call. And ideally, we would have, since Kent and I both are chairs, we would have liked to step aside and have a hum beat done, but I don't think so. Robert has an ability to conduct a hum at this point. So do you think we should go ahead and maybe do a hum to test hum or a hum to see if we want to get this document into last call?
Oh, and I see Robert is, let me accept him. Go ahead, Robert.
Yes, I think hum's a good idea here to do. I'm happy to ask the questions if that's useful. Obviously, it's worth the working group knowing, I think you mentioned this earlier, that you two chairs cannot participate in hum, so that will modify the results slightly.
Thanks for noting that. So, Ken, why don't you go ahead and run the hum this time?
And do positive and negative, and I'll press the hum tool button. Was at the mic, so oh, that may have been an accident. I'm going to cancel. Rob, were you going to conduct a hum?
Okay, so I can ask the question. My first question actually is how many people who have read this version of the document or a recent revision of it?
And go to the hum tool and select.
Here's where there's a long pause because I think the time is too long. So the result's piano, which it's hard to interpret what that actually means with the current tool. So we knew that the full room was forte. I think piano means that at least a few people have read this version or a previous version of this document. So I think that, in my opinion, is sufficient to suggest this should progress to working group last call. So I think the next question I would like to ask, not as a hum, but as a question, does anyone object to us taking this to working group last call now? And if so, could they go to the mic line if they've got any objections? Looks like Tim Carey might.
Well, he wants to share screen, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, sharing screen, that's not microphone. So I'm going to cancel that.
So I don't see anyone. There's no comments.
No
So I
objection.
think, yeah, so I'm happy for this to be taken to work group last call.
All right.
Mahesh, and did you have any final closing comments?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'm going to now bring up the next presentation. Just give me a second to switch.
So while Kent is bringing it up, so we're running a little behind schedule. So let's hope the rest of some of the presenters can help us speed this up. Pierre, you'll have to queue up.
Actually, it's going to be Thomas.
Oh, okay.
And he's in the queue. He's accepted. Accepting microphone and video. Okay, Thomas.
Can you hear me?
And see you. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm presenting here for Unite, the UDP-based transport for configured subscription draft. Next slide, please. This draft has been presented to you in previous IETF 107 under a different name. We have been reworking the draft to further simplify and also improve the wording, and also rename the draft to be more aligned with the NetConf working group. Next slide. The main objective is still we want to enable that massive amounts, high volume metrics can be delivered from routers with the distributed architectures, directly being able to push from line cards. It's applicable within controlled environments where a reasonable amount of loss is acceptable. Main focus on accounting. Next slide. Previously, the draft was focusing on configured and dynamic subscription. In order to simplify, we are focusing now solely on configured subscription. It can be used in conjunction with the distributed notification draft, which I show next. In the UDP transport, the header supports options. One option is the fragmentation, which is supported, and we are supporting different kind of encodings like XML, JSON, GPP, CBOR is in this draft. Next slide. Regarding security considerations, we've taken out the DTLS part to put it into in a separate draft. So from an application point of view, it's solely focusing on UDP transport. Regarding congestion control, we have in the header a so-called message ID, which allows on the data collection side on the receiver end to see if there were there was loss, similar like it's implemented in IPFix. Out of scope of this draft is the replay of the metrics. We already have working code and been testing in our lab environment. Next slide. We've taken inputs from the previous IETF sessions from 103 to 105 to simplify and the drafts, and also did some improvements in the wording. So I hope now that it reads much more easily and clarifies a lot of the questions it raised previously. And we would like to call for adoption into NetConf. Any questions?
Yeah, we have. Tim is in the queue. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay.
Hi. I was just wondering, so you had said that this has already been implemented in some sort. Is that publicly available?
It's publicly available, yes.
Where would it be publicly available at? Is it on GitHub, or do you?
No, it's not open source. We are currently working on an open source implementation. It will be soon available. Closed source, it's already available.
Okay. All right. And so you're working on an open source implementation that'll be publicly available, but it's not yet, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Chat window, there may be an issue with the slides. Slide 5 is still showing, though on my screen it looks like slide 6 is showing. Mahesh, what slide number are you seeing?
6.
Okay.
Yeah, I see 6 as well.
Okay, good.
We have Robert on the queue.
I also see 6. So just a quick clarifying question here.
Sure.
So by UDP, I presume this is effectively a lossy transport or best effort. Is that a way to describe this? That the devices are stream the data out, and if some of it gets dropped due to congestion, that's just bad luck, and the clients have to, which makes sense.
Exactly. So main focus is on accounting. It's lossy. There is a way to detect, based on the message ID, you can detect the amount of loss you have, but you cannot retransmit the metrics.
Okay, thank you.
Benoit's in the queue. Go ahead, Benoit. Benoit, did you have a comment?
Yeah, make sure you press the send audio.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Perfect.
very good. So Thomas, do I get this right that basically this drive is about UDP export IPFix-like or NetFlow-like of Yang objects?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, very good, thanks.
To conduct a quick hum. So much like Rob's questions, first, how many people have read this version of the draft or even the previous versions of the draft, because it's the same work? Please hum now. Seems like 35 seconds is too long.
Yeah, you need some music here.
Yeah.
Okay, so a piano, which was the same response that Rob noticed on a previous one. And I do, okay, for a second I thought Benoit was in the queue. Oh, he is in the queue. Go ahead, Benoit.
So I still think this is an interesting idea, exactly like it was an interesting idea to have IPFix based on UDP, which is in the end what has been implemented and used in industry. However, at the time, we were forced by the ISG to have a congestion-aware protocol, hence the must CTP. But actually, it didn't matter because nobody implemented a CTP, and one of the primary reasons is that we could not export directly from line cards with a CTP. So it's more a question for Rob and maybe the IESG that even if this is a good idea, we want to know if we're going to be blocked at the end by the IESG. You don't have to answer now, Rob, but that's something you might want to take into account.
Go ahead, Rob.
Benoit, thanks for raising. Yes, I can't give an answer to that question now, but yes, I'll definitely take it offline. Thank you.
Tim's in the queue. Go ahead, Tim.
But I think maybe it's a question that I had, right? Because there's different protocols that you had in IPFix, and certainly, you know, I think we probably need a more efficient Yang variant for IPFix, right? So I agree with this work in that sense. But is the work done, these drafts that you have, this one and the one that comes after it, is it sectioned, and I think it is it sectioned enough that allows you to do multiple transport protocols that you can add on to the subscribe notifications? You have subscriptions, and then you have UDP based, TCP based, whatever. You know, it's kind of like what we did with the client server stuff. Is the model designed such that you can add in new transport and encodings as an addendum to the initial draft? That maybe can get around any concerns, because you just say, well, we bring those in later.
Well, I think that's the intention that at the end, you can actually select select the transport you want for a certain subscription. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
And just to add to that, Tim, this is, we might call this the UDP notif transport, much like Mahesh's draft is the HTTPS notif draft. And so all these notif transports are meant to be compatible with subscribe notifications.
Yes, but it works on the subscription to distributed notifications. It's got its own little caveat, right? That it's adding in as well, right? And that's what I was worried about, making sure is that subscriptions, whether it's UDP based or TCP based, you know, you just added new bindings.
Right. It's basically in order to allow the distribution onto the line cards and being able to detect the loss of metrics on a process. I mean, because you have multiple processes now, exporting the metrics, you need an identifier to understand from which process these metrics were coming from. And for that purpose, and I will explain that in the next slide deck, the generator ID was introduced. But it's optional, so it's not something, it's required. And the UDP notif draft makes use of it.
So with that, maybe I think we should switch since we're running behind.
Okay. Regarding the adoption poll, though, what do you want to do? Maybe run that hum with the two
Maybe,
slides.
yeah.
Do it together. Okay. Just a second. I need to stop sharing this.
So this is the subscription to distributed notification. Next slide. Same as to the UDP notif. We have been taking feedback from the last IETF107 and did also a rewrite and an alignment to the NetConf working group in this draft. We want to make it more simpler, more clear to understand. Next. The objective is the same as for the UDP notif draft. We want to support massive amounts of networking device data in a high volume. And here the main focus is that it can be distributed among line cards. So it supports distributed forwarding systems. Next slide, please. It works in conjunction with the UDP-based transport for configured subscription draft. It basically describes the composition of the subscription among the route processors and the processors on the line cards in distributed forwarding systems. I think the important point is from a transport point of view, it shares the same IPv4, IPv6 source address. So regardless if it's pushed from the route processor or the line cards, that simplifies the subscription. Although it shares the same source IP address, each process has a dedicated layer 4 port. So, and it basically follows the same principle as most IPFix implementation today. Next. Regarding congestion control, as previously mentioned, in the UDP notif draft, you have the message ID, which is identifying or generating basically like the sequence numbers, so you can detect on the data collection side receiving end, there were messages lost. And since now in the distributed notif, there are multiple publishers, in order to identify the publisher, the generator ID has been introduced. Same as for the UDP notif draft, retransmission is out of scope in this draft. Next slide, please. And also, same as for the UDP notif draft, we've been taken the feedback from IETF 103 to 105, and also from the chairs to simplify the writing and align towards the NetConf working group, and also we would like to call for adoption. Any feedback or input?
So Mahesh, in the interest of time, should we just jump into asking if there's any objections?
Yeah.
Okay, so are there any objections to adopting this work, both this draft as well as the previous draft? I noted that Benoit mentioned the comment to Rob, but that aside, anything else?
You want to do a hum? Or just...
Yeah, I think I'll just wait 10 seconds. Okay, I don't see any objections. So Mahesh, do you think we should ask for a hum in terms of favors, or just accept this as a positive response?
Right. Why don't we just do a quick hum?
Okay. So all in favor, since there's no objections, but all in favor, let's see how much in favor you are. Please hum now. For both drafts, the previous and this one together. It's piano. And as a chair, I'm not able to hum, but I do support this work as a participant, I should say.
Same here.
Okay. So I think that's successful then. And we will adopt this. Actually, we'll take it to the list and just make sure there's no objections there and then adopt it. Okay, thank you, Thomas. And we'll need to switch. Mahesh, are you going to start presenting now?
Yes.
Okay, and I believe we have Peng. Pen Lu?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Peng.
Okay, great. Okay, this is Peng Liu from China Mobile, and it's about telemetry data, export capability, and tagging capability, referring to those two drafts. Okay, next slide, please.
Okay, give me one second.
Okay, first, let's have a recap on the two capabilities. So the data export capability allows the client to subscribe data store node update with specific transport protocol, coding format, encryption compression mode, and the data self-explanation text capability can realize that, provide telemetry data classification, and sort out the characteristic data, allows the clients to automatically select the target data objects that are of interest to the client application. And finally, it can provide multi-dimensional network visibility and analysis. Yes, next slide, please. Okay, here are the document status. Both were first presented did in the last meeting, and it was just to set up design team to progress the work. So the last update of data export capabilities is that first we add usage example of telemetry data export, which will be introduced later. And second, we add the timer event support and counter threshold support under per node capabilities, representing third, we add the redundant suppression support under per node capabilities. And the last update of notification node tag capabilities in version 2 is that first we add usage example of telemetry data tagging. And second, we change group ID into self tag ID, which is self-describing attributes for each data node. And third, we change parent group into multi-source tag, which can be used to aggregate performance metric from different sources. And last, we add clear definition for operation type attribute, refers to statistic operation on target data object. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, next slide. Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
It's on slide 5 of 7 now.
Yeah. So are you not seeing an update on your side?
Okay. So you change the slides, right? But here is
It's
not
showing
changed
slide
my
5 now.
voice.
What slide do you
Okay.
see?
Okay, on to slide 4, right?
Okay. So let me go back to 4.
Okay,
Okay.
sorry.
Everyone is seeing 4 now, but I'll just quickly say yesterday Mahesh and I were testing and he had to actually exit Meet.echo and come back, and then his ability to see the slides returned. So that might be going on with you right now. Okay.
So we are
Okay.
on deck
So my
slide
screen
4.
maybe the wrong slides, but I will go to introduce the slides 4. Yeah. Here gives the relationship of the self-explanation capabilities module augment the IETF system capabilities module and the data export capabilities module augment both IETF system capabilities module and the notification capabilities module. So in the self-explanation capabilities module, key capability attributes to be advertised include the OPM tag. It's the telemetry tag for performance metric data object. Includes object property and the metric tag. And the operation type is a statistic operation on target data object. For example, the min, max, sum, and average. And for this, if the operation type is threshold type, the corresponding data object supports threshold handling. For example, it can scan all interface for a certain type every 5 seconds or others, and check the counters or status to cross threshold. Return an array of interface entities that match the search. And if the operation type is average, min, max, sum, it indicates that the data object supports the statics operation. And then we add the multi-source tag indicates performance metric data object has been aggregate. Yeah, so in the data export capabilities, key capability attributes to be advertised include timer event support, it means the timer-based trigger on target data object is supported in the server, and the counter threshold support. And sometimes the counter threshold is the trigger conditions, and the timer event is a method to adjust the policy of report or subscription. And it also includes a transport protocol, encoding, and compression mode, which indicate the compression method to compress the subscribed data. Okay, next slide is slide 5, please.
See it?
Okay. So this slide gives the usage example of the telemetry data tagging, like this figure. For example, if we want to subscribe the data of interface module and the in errors data, which might represent the number of error packet is seen as a KPI metric, belongs to the statistic class. So first, the publisher advertised telemetry data node capability to the subscriber, including the path and the metric information. So when it receives, it can identify target data object, which are the interface module and the in errors data, and it can also get the associated data path. So you can see it in the right side. It sends established subscription RPC to subscribe specific data object that are interested to the client. And next slide is 6, please. Okay, sorry. Do you change the slides because I can't see the slide
Slides.
now? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. This slide is a usage example of telemetry data export, which can support the adaptive subscription. Here are the process. First is the telemetry data export capability notification of the device. Includes the threshold support for specific node or timer-based trigger support. And the network management system design event-based telemetry policy. For example, when 4 is bigger than 4, trigger YAM notification for a set of specific data store node. For some data object, it may support more than one interval. And it also should be noted that the policy can also be defined in advance. And next, the manager has adaptive subscription with event-based telemetry policy role. Then finally, the notification for the store node update with specific threshold, and which can be found in the right example. There are more than one period set to realize the adaptive subscription. Okay, next slide, please. It's 7, yeah. So it's the content of those two drafts, and the key values of telemetry data tagging capability includes identify performance measurement related data for service assurance application, and provide network visibility to network load, traffic flow, capacity, and queues data category in millisecond or second, which is meaningful the high performance of the network. And the key value of data export capabilities includes provide flexibility to select different transport specific parameters. For example, the transport protocol and the encoding format and others. And it also can avoid unexpected failure due to lacking capability exchanging. And finally, it can allow various subscription policy based on threshold support. and message bounding support and time event support. So can we call the adoption of it as a WG work item? And any comments?
So Kent, do we do the same with this? Maybe combine?
You mean this presentation with the next one?
No. Oh, actually, this was two drafts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we should just start with the same sequence of questions. We'll do a quick hum. How many people have read this version of the draft? Please hum now. And actually, there's two drafts, so let your hum reflect that. Piano, which is the result we got previously. Are there any objections to adopting this draft? It's not a hum, but if you have any objections, please raise your hand on the microphone icon. 15 seconds.
Okay, we have Tim in the queue.
Yep, go ahead, Tim.
I don't necessarily have an objection. I will say the export capabilities from the last IETF meeting, there were some concerns that were listed about needing to look at the larger capabilities for reporting, and that we were going to look at maybe a design team for capabilities. I don't know if we progressed that or what's going on. That was notes that I took from last meeting.
Chen?
Maybe, okay.
Can you answer that? Actually, yeah, it was suggested by chair to set up a design team. Actually, we worked together with China Mobile and other partner. Actually, we actually keep on polish this work, and we also welcome other contributor to join this worker. Yeah.
Okay, I think that addressed the comment. So in that case, one more hum. So I didn't hear an objection there. So all in favor of adopting this draft, please hum now. Or two drafts. Okay, so piano, and I think based on our previous comments, that was sufficient to take it to the list to get a final adoption poll confirmation there on the list. And I think with that, we'll move on to the next presentation. I don't see any other comments currently. So Mahesh, if you can open up the next presentation. And Peng, if you could, we're running a little bit behind, so try to do what you can to make up for some time.
Okay.
Mahesh is bringing up the slides, just a second.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. This is Qing. I'm here to present two Yangpuji subscription related draft. One is about adaptive subscription. The second is bank subscription. Next. Next page. Actually, for adaptive subscription, it actually allows the client to configure the server to support a different update interval. It also allows the server to switch data connection rate based on the resource usage. So for bulk subscription, it actually it allows the client to instruct the server to see which subscription can be bundled together, which cannot. So for adaptive subscription and bulk subscription, both actually was presented in last IETF meeting, and it was also suggested to set up the design team to progress this work. And for adaptive subscription and from the offline discussion, it was suggested to align with the ECA model. That is the one progressing in the net model working group, and also it was suggested to provision a ratio of the new measurement interval, such as we can provision 5. That means you can provision 5 times faster than the original period. And it also suggests to characterize the adaptive subscription, whether it belongs to the unchanged subscription, whether it belongs to the period subscription. And for bulk subscription, and actually from the discussion, it was suggested to add a default value for maximize the bundle latency for the publisher. And we also discussed how to classify the subscription work criteria we should follow to classify this subscription, whether it's based on the transport or encoding, and whether we can based on the maximize the bundle latency and other parameters. And compared with the previous version for adaptive subscription, we add a usage example, and this is the main change for the adaptive subscription. We also align with the ECA model, and we add like a data path or data to identify the target data object. We also add a condition expression to represent the threshold or watermark to be satisfied. And also, in addition, we actually highlighted the motivation why we introduced this adaptive subscription. For bulk subscription, the main changes is we try to highlight the motivation in the introduction section, and we also add a new parameter we call the bundle size in the model structure, and we also fix some of the typo in the security section. Next page. So for adaptive subscription, actually, the main goal of the adaptive subscription is define the YARN model and associated mechanism to allow the client to configure the server with multiple updated interval. It also allow the server to switch the data connection rate based on the resource usage change. And so the motivation to do this actually because in some cases when you set the data connection rate is very high, and it may actually overload the network device, consume too much network resource. But when you set the data connection rate too low, actually the telemetry data you connected may be not sufficient to identify the network failure and also verify the correct network behavior. So our idea actually is we can configure both connector and publisher with multiple periodic interval and other associated parameter like a counter threshold, so we can allow the server to switch the periodic interval according to resource usage. So typical case actually is you can monitor the wireless signal strength. This signal strength may change over the time. So we can actually to switch data connection based on this wireless signal strength. Next. So this is what a solution looks like. Actually, before to design the adaptive subscription policy or send an adaptive subscription to the server, you need to make the client to understand what the server capability they can provide for example, for some target data object, whether it is support the threshold handling, or for some of set of data object, whether it can support multiple updated intervals. So based on this server capability extension, actually we can design appropriate adaptive subscription policy, and we can get this policy set up on the server, so the server can switch the data connection rate based on the resource usage change. So when data connection rate get changed, it can immediately inform the client about this change, and also can inform a corresponding data connection rate. So the model design, we augment from the subscription notification model, and with a bunch of adaptive subscription parameters to actually define the threshold we call the watermarker that can be crossed, and we also actually define appropriate the update interval corresponding to different watermarks. And we also actually augment the establishing notification, subscription RPC with the similar adaptive subscription parameters for a server. Then when they switch the data connection rate, actually they need to send the notification. So we also define state change notification. We call the adaptive period update notification. So this notification can tell the client about the data connection rate changes. So next. So here we give you example. The use case we call the wireless performance monitoring. For this wireless performance monitoring, we actually define example Wi-Fi MAC model. Actually, we can monitor the wireless signal strength. So the key parameter we want to keep track of is the signal strength we call the ISSI value. So when this ISS value is greater than, for example, minus 65 dB, actually we can switch to actually a high data connection rate, and for example, we can scan all the client every 5 seconds for specific Wi-Fi interface. And when the ISS value is less than minus 65 dB, actually we can switch to the higher data connection rate. We can scan, the client every, 60 seconds up to 360 seconds. So upon we get this policy set up on the server, so the server may switch to the data connection rate. It can send the notification to the client. So here we give you an example what does this kind of notification look like. So next. So for bulk subscription, actually, the goal to define the bulk subscription actually is allow the client to instruct the server about what kind of subscription can be bundled together, what kind of subscription cannot be bundled together. So it can work together with message bundle that has already been progressed in the NetConf working group, and so can actually form the complete solution or closed loop solution. So we actually also, introduce the criteria to classify the subscription. So we not only we can base on like a encoding or transport to bundle subscription on the same transport, but also we can bundle the subscription based on some other parameter we call the bundle latency or bundle size or compression algorithm to classify this subscription. Next. So here is the solution overview. Actually, we before to send the bulk subscription to the server, actually we can let the client to understand whether the server support the message bundle capability. We can rely on the server capability extension, and so the model design actually we augment from subscription model, subscription notification model with a set of new parameters. For example, maximize the bundle latency and maximize the bundle size and compression algorithm. And so for max bundle latency, actually it actually it is maximize latency latencycy before the notification can be generated and egress from the publisher. And we also support the compression algorithm parameter. These can be used to compress the subscribe the data to indicate what kind of compression algorithm we are using. Next. So this draft actually has already been around for a while. Actually, the key value for the adaptive subscription is address the performance issue on the device, especially when the device get overloaded, when you're facing the massive data connection and processing. And it also can reduce the amount of data to be exported. For bulk subscription, actually, it can improve the data connection efficiency and performance. And also, it can work together with the message bundle and form the complete solution. So we think the draft actually is mature enough. Actually, would like working group to consider to adopt on these two draft comments.
Hi, this is Kent as a participant. A couple comments. First, does this work over any notif-based transport, both dynamic descriptions and configured descriptions?
Yes, you are right. For adaptive subscription, we can support not only config subscription but also dynamic subscription. For bulk subscription, actually, currently, actually, we main cases we can support the config subscription. For dynamic subscription, actually, we introduce a new RPC actually to indicate this new RPC can work together with the dynamic subscription. So I think yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay, and then the second comment, which is a question, to what extent has this been implemented?
Actually, for adaptive subscription, actually we already implement most of these parameter, and for bulk subscription, actually it actually is it is in planning. Yeah.
Okay, great. So now let's do the same kind of hums that we did before. So first, for those that have read this version of the draft, two drafts, please hum now. And by the way, the results showing up as piano isn't that bad. If you remember, the baseline test that we did at the beginning showed it as fortissimo, and that was when we asked everyone to hum loudly. Okay, so this is showing up as piano. So again, the same questions before. Is there any objections to adopting these two drafts? It's not a hum, it's just please raise your hand at the mic if you have an objection. 15 seconds. Yeah, I don't see any objections, but there's a comment on the chat window saying that everything is piano today. Yes, Rob, please go ahead.
So not an objection on this particular draft, but again, it's the same observation that all our hum results are coming back as piano. I'm not sure we know quite what that means. So I think we just want to be careful in terms of knowing how much support there are for all these documents we're asking for adoption for. And it may well be that that's confirmed in the list anyway, but just a word of caution.
Right, and we are asking for objections. We're not hearing any. And I think the assumption is that there's support, whether it's strong or weak is unclear, but we will take it to the list to get confirmation. I think the assumption is that's adopted unless someone says they object on the list. Does that sound appropriate and proper to you?
I think it'd also be worth measuring on the list what level of support there is, which you get. So rather than just checking for objections, I think it'd also be worth seeing what level of support there is.
Okay. Well then, but let's try to continue the third question like before. If you support adopting this draft, please hum now. in 2 drafts, sorry. Piano again. Okay, thank you, Chin, for the presentation.
Thank you.
We'll have to confirm on the list. And Mahesh, I think we're on the last presentation now, which is mine. Great, thank you. Okay, so as everyone may recall, we worked on secure zero-touch provisioning a while back, RFC 8572. And this presentation wishes to make a minor extension to it. I have 2 co-authors, Russ Housley, who was previously Security Area Director and also previously IETF Chair, and Sean Turner, who was previously Security Area Director. So they're both well known in the security area. Next slide, please. The motivation for this work is the RFC 8572 is being adopted by vendors and telecoms, some established infrastructure providers and startups. And one feature that's missing is the ability for the bootstrapping device, which herein is known as the SZTP client, to be issued an LDEV ID certificate from the Bootstrap server. The ability to issue an LDEV ID during the bootstrapping is critical when the LDEV ID is needed in order to establish post-bootstrap network connectivity. So for instance, if you're trying to create dynamically provisioned network slices through which the bootstrapped device is intended to communicate. So you actually have to configure that LDEV ID certificate at the bootstrap phase in order for that to be possible. So this ID updates RFC 8572 to fill in that missing piece. Next slide, please. So on screen is effectively what RFC 8572 does. Device powers on, it sends an HTTPS post. It can include any number of input parameters, and then ultimately it gets back a 200, which includes well, it's the conveyed information, the response that is the bootstrapping data that it's looking for. Next slide, please. So the update, so the top line and the bottom line are the same, but the top line is just a little bit different. We wish to introduce a new input parameter, which is known as the CSR support parameter. We wish to enable the SCTP server to return back a HTTP 400 bad request, and for that error payload to include a request info structure. And then for the client to again send the same get bootstrapping data request to the server, but this time including another new parameter called the CSR parameter. And then finally, the bottom line is the same as before. It's getting back the conveyed information, but this time the content that it could also include a signed LDEV ID certificate. Next slide, please. We're just going to go into a little bit of those new structures that we were just talking about. So first, there's the CSR support structure, and effectively, it's there's 2 parts. There's one, it enables the SCP client to indicate if it supports generating a new key, and if so, which algorithms it supports. So, you know, the client already has a private key. The question is, and many times in security circles, it's advantageous for the client to generate a new private key dedicated to that LDEV ID certificate. And so here is whether or not the client expressing whether or not it's able to generate a new key, and again, which algorithms it supports. And then 2, it enables the SCP client to specify what CSR formats it supports. So P10 is PKCS10. CMC and CMS are other certificate request formats that are standardized by the IETF. And so these are identities. As you can see, it's a format identifier. It's a list of format identifiers. And being identities, it means that future identities can always be defined. Next slide, please. As said, there's a desire to return back an error response, and in the errors info field, we want to return a structure. So this is actually an SX structure, request info. And so this response provides 3 bits of information. First, it enables the SCTP server to indicate if it wants the SCTP client to generate a new key, and if so, which algorithms to use. So of course, this depends on the client saying that it's able to generate a new key. But okay. Secondly, it enables the SCTP server to select which CSR format the SCTP client is to generate. So of those, P10, CMC, CMS, which one should it send? And by the way, this is kind of important because the SCTP server, the backend of the SCTP server, needs to communicate with the certificate authority. And depending on the certificate authority implementations, various request formats are preferred. So for instance, we're working with, I should say I'm aware of folks working with different certificate authorities. One in particular comes to mind is the Microsoft Certificate Authority, which in particular prefers CMC as the format that it wishes to use. And then thirdly, it enables the SCTP server to provide a fully populated but not yet signed CSR structure. So that's that cert rec info structure there at the bottom. So essentially it's fully populated. It has all the V3 extension fields the way it wants them, the the algorithm identifiers filled in. All the client needs to do is to sign it with its private key and then return it in the next request. Next slide, please. So again, the client would then send another get bootstrapping request, and this time including the CSR input parameter. And this input parameter enables SCTP client to communicate the requested CSR format in the requested format to the SCTP server. So it's just a choice amongst the various formats that are supported. Next slide, please. So this is a recap. It's the same slide as I shown before, but again, the request with a new input node, a response, which is an error, providing some selections back to the client, another request containing the result of the final certificate request, and then finally the conveyed information that contains the signed LWD certificate. Next slide, please. So this is important work. It's also a requested enhancement. It came to me, well, by way of my co-authors, as I mentioned before. They actually brought it to me as the primary author of the RFC and requested the update to be made. Again, it's blocking adoption in some deployments. So the request here is for the working group to adopt it. This is limited scope. It's fairly, already the authors have made every attempt to complete the draft. So what you see, the 0.1 version is practically complete. Although there's a little bit of a discussion with the Microsoft Certificate Authority folks as to whether or not we also need to support another request format known as CRMF, but it won't fundamentally change the focus, the focus or the solution. It's just a matter of documenting yet another format. So with that in mind, if the working group were to adopt, it would complete quickly.
All right. So let me do a quick poll to see how many people have read any version of this draft, starting now.
Well, MeetEcho rather abruptly cancels the meeting about 3 minutes after the close. So we're at the close time right now. It's presumably in 3 minutes we're going to cut off.
Okay. All right. So one other quick hum to see how many people feel that this document should be adopted as a work group item. So presumably you saw the result from the previous hum. Okay, piano again. So finally, any objections to adopting this document? And this is not a hum again. If you have any objections, raise your hand. Robert?
So not an objection. As an individual, this seems really important work. So it's reversed. I strongly support this.
All right. With that, I think that concludes. Anything else, Ken, from your side?
Just quickly, because I'm a chair, I'm unable to hum, but I, of course, strongly support. Also, I know that my co-chair, my co-authors were unable to join because they're doing other working groups right now, but they would also have supported. But yeah, so that was it as a participant. As a chair, I think we've completed everything on time, barely. We're going to get abruptly cut off in about a minute. But thank you, everyone, for joining. Any other comments, Mahesh?
No, not from my side. All right,
Excellent.
thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.